I'm John Law, this is Chasing Cars, and behind me is the brand new Citroen C4. Now, just like the original C4, this third-gen car is tasked with bringing a bit of French flair and good fortune back to Citroen in Australia. But in today's review, we're going to take a critical eye of the new, rather funky-looking C4 and seeing if it's able to do just that, because it arrives with a rather high price of entry, $37,990. Now, on the surface, that seems really expensive for what is a small Citroen, but as we'll get to in the inside, it's actually really well equipped. And although it's $300 or thereabouts more than a Volkswagen Golf R-Line, it does have more features in that car. So, as I said, we'll get into that in just a minute after we talk about design. And of course, if you have any comments on the Citroen C4, please let me know in the comments section down below. And if you haven't done so already, we'd also love it if you could hit that subscribe button. Now, I'm not exactly sure where to start with the Citroen C4 because it looks so different to pretty much everything else in this class. And in my opinion, at least, that's a good thing. But you can let me know down below what you think. But we're going to talk about some of the really interesting features, starting with this headlight arrangement. The LED headlights and daytime running lights, I think, are really distinctive on this car. They're joined by this nice little chrome strip up the front. And of course, down the flanks, we have Citroen's trademark air bumps, which have shrunk for the new C4, but they're still there and they're still quite a practical addition. And of course, the actual proportion of this car. Now, is it a hatch, is it a sedan, or is it an SUV? It's up to you basically, because it sits right between all of those metrics in the Australian market. In terms of size, it's longer than Volkswagen Golf, but shorter than a Mazda CX-30. The same is true for the height of this car. However, it has a longer wheelbase than both of those vehicles. So you can let me know what you think of the Citroen C4. Is it an SUV? Is it a sedan? Is it a hatch? I kind of guess it doesn't matter, and I guess Citroen's going to be pushing it as an SUV, as that's what sells heavily here in Australia. But anyway, let's see if those dimensions have any impact on the interior space of this C4. So inside, the Citroen C4 has a bit of a history of being incredibly quirky, but not having much substance to it. And I'm very pleased to report that this latest generation car has still got a lot of those Citroen quirks, as you can probably see already by the shape of the steering wheel, but also there's plenty of substance in here to make the quirks not just gimmicks, but real interesting additions. So let's start by talking about the normal stuff, and then we'll get into the cool stuff. First up, this 10-inch touchscreen up here. It's quite wide, but quite slitty, quite narrow, and you've got these two little shortcut buttons here that allow you to navigate quite well. Now, it's not the greatest touchscreen in the world, and that sort of comes down to this car's slightly older underpinnings, but it works well. You've got wide Apple CarPlay, and after this car, Citroen have confirmed that all their vehicles will use wireless, but for now you've got wide Apple CarPlay by this USB-C port right here. Now, moving down from the overly bezeled touchscreen, we have very straightforward aircon controls. They're all physical, but all of the screens pop up here. They're sort of always around as well. You adjust the AC and it's on the left and on the right for the passenger. You also have dual zone climate control, which is great. Auto function as well. And then you've got these dual storage positions, really good spot to put your phone, and there's another little spot here for odds and ends or cables. And then below this spot, you have even more secret storage for hiding your biscuits so your partner doesn't get to them perhaps. You've also got this little 12-volt socket, and I don't know exactly what this hole is for, maybe for the key, but it's all piano black that then runs back here. And I guess this is going to bring me to the interesting stuff, starting with this leather-appointed steering wheel. It is very strangely squared off, and initially I thought I was going to hate it, but actually I've come to love it. It's very small in diameter, and you can actually sort of grab on the top and, whip it round, and as we'll get to in the driving, the really light steering is one of the interesting parts about this C4. Now, in front of me, we've got a 5.5-inch digital driver's display. It's something we saw on the first gen C4, and it's great to see that come back now. This one obviously has a bit more content. You can get your navigation directions. You can also just see normal stuff like dials, your tachometer, your speedometer, all of that sort of stuff. It's quite functional. You've also got a head-up display in front of you as well, and it really adds to this car's well-equipped feeling. And then we get on to the funky practicalities. So we've got the normal stuff like really decent door bins with rubberized coatings inside so nothing rattles about, deep cup holders, comfy armrest with a little bit of storage that is also rubberized down there. But the thing that Citroen really wants to talk about is this iPad holder. Now, I think this is rather clever. However, they could have pushed it further. In my book, because I personally don't work on an iPad. I know a couple of the guys in the office have iPads for certain reasons, But for me, it would have been great if Citroen had really just taken this to the next level. And although it's great that you can mount an iPad while you're moving, they could have made this lower tray stiff enough and sturdy enough and come out far enough so that you could mount a little 13-inch laptop on there so you get your work done like a sort of moving office. I'd love to see that in perhaps an update, but at least they have something cool and quirky going on there. And then finally, we've got to talk about the quality, because this car feels way better than French cars from the past. All the materials are actually really high quality to touch. The dashboard's all soft mold, you've got soft mold here, and it feels well screwed together. I haven't heard a single rattle in this car in my time driving, which is not something you can say for all French cars. And then we've also got these seats. Leather appointed, Sienna leather appointed, and that's one of the big things that this car has that a similarly priced Golf R-Line does not. They also have heating for both driver and passenger, electric adjustment for the driver, and you get a pseudo massage function, which basically inflates the lumbar support in and out, and it's not a full-on massage function like you'd see in something like a premium brand like an Audi, but it does relieve a little bit of stress on longer drives. And then of course we have the panoramic sunroof fitted to the single shine specification that comes to Australia. So that's the C4's front cockpit. Let's jump in the back. Now here, the comfort that you see in the front seat is really almost amplified in the back seat, because the C4 is a very comfortable place to be, considering it's a small SUV, hatch, whatever you want to call it. It's very generous in space. As you can see, I've got legroom behind my own driving position. I've got a little bit of extra toe room as well. And although we still have that sunroof, my head is just able to clear the roof here. And I reckon that's pretty decent. Of course, materials do move to scratchy and hard in the back on the top of the doors, but you do have this soft padding on the armrest. You also got nice little door bins here for holding your bottles. And the reason why it's so comfortable in the back seat is because the Citroen C4 has a 2.67 meter wheelbase, which is longer than pretty much every other car in the class, certainly longer than a Kia Cerato and things like a Volkswagen Golf as well. It's yeah, it's really nice and spacious. You also have a pretty good view out, and I should mention how comfortable this bench is. It's very soft, the rear is supportive and nicely inclined, so I could actually be surprisingly comfortable in this car for a long period of time. Now, the only real gripe I have with the back seat is the lack of a center armrest, given the rest of it's so comfortable, but the width of this bench is pushed right to the sides of the car, and that means I reckon this is one of the few small cars that you could easily fit 3 people across for a reasonable length journey, and that's pretty great. Of course, we've also got adjustable air vents back here, which is, I guess, not something to be sniffed at in Australia in a small car. It's very necessary. You've also got a little charging point back there, and yeah, that's the rear seat of the Citroen C4. Now, when it comes to fitting baby seats in the Citroen C4, it's not too bad a job. The roofline's pretty high despite its sedan appearance, so I could swing the baby seats in without too much issue. The doors opened also fairly widely. Now, there's one thing that might be divisive, and that's the ISOFIX ports. They're behind a zipper rather than a clip-up cover, which means you don't lose any clip-up covers, but also it's just a little bit fiddlier to get the clip in. You can let me know what you think of that in the comment section down below. As for the actual space in the front seat, at 6'2", I'm a bit compromised with the rear-facing baby seat in the passenger position, but ultimately I could go for about half an hour, 45 minutes like this and not be too uncomfortable. Now, around the back, we have a really funky treatment of the exterior. You can see there's sort of a little bit of inspiration from Citroen's back catalogue, including maybe the Citroen GS and also a little bit of Citroen XM, but you can let me know if you see that in the comment section down below. Let's pop this boot, where we find a Golf rivaling 380 litres of space. Now you notice the whole hatch comes up more like a hatchback, like a liftback, like a Skoda Octavia, and you've got a pretty decent load space. We only managed to fit 2 of the 3 Chasing Cars suitcases in. You can almost get 3, but just not quite. The rest of the boot is actually fairly sparse on features for a French boot. There's not that many cubbies to hide things away. And then under the floor, we have just a space saver spare tyre. And that's pretty much the Citroen C4 boot, which I will note now doesn't have an electronic tailgate, but it's not too hard or heavy to close, and it doesn't go that high. So not a huge deal. Now let's talk about how much this thing costs to run. Now, unfortunately for the moment, Australians only have access to the piston-powered Citroen C4, and that means the running costs are pretty much normal for a petrol car of this size. So that 1.2 litre petrol engine is supposed to get about 6.1 litres per 100 kilometres according to the ADR cycle. In our testing, we're sitting around 7.3 litres per 100 Ks in a mix of driving, and we reckon that's pretty good. As for servicing, intervals are 12 months or 15,000 Ks, and the total cost for 5 years of ownership is $2,484. So the Citroen C4. Now, this thing might have a quirky interior and plenty of exterior presence to make you look at it when it goes past, but it's all going to fall down if it doesn't drive very well. And I'm happy to report that that is not the case, because Citroen has clearly worked hard on developing the chassis of this car on some twisty French roads with terrible surfaces that makes it really well suited to Australian conditions. It's properly plush to drive, and the steering is just so light driving around tight urban environments. It's just such an easy car to place with that sort of hybrid between SUV and small car. The visibility is awesome, and yeah, it just means you can take on an urban assault in this car. It's mad. I love driving the Citroen C4. But we'll come back to all that in a minute, because first up, let's talk about the engine. Now, under the bonnet of this car is a 1.2 litre turbocharged 3-cylinder engine that kicks out 114 kilowatts of power and 240 newton meters of torque. And those outputs are really good. And this engine is a peach. It's got great mid-range grunt, the sort of stuff you expect from a French car. You can get off the line quickly, and thanks to the good calibration of this 8-speed Aisin automatic, you can also thread yourself through traffic really nicely and be quite assertive in this car. Now, of course, we'd love to see the 100 kilowatt electric version of this C4 come to Australia, and apparently it is under consideration, so hopefully that does indeed make it to our shores, because that would be a really great counterpart to this petrol C4 for someone who wanted to drive the car a little bit more in urban environments. Now let's get on to the ride of this C4, because that's really what sets this car apart from many of its rivals. Rivals like the Golf R-Line, for example, which kind of try and be a little bit sporty, lower suspension, slightly bigger wheels and tires, kind of make the car drive a little bit more accurately and better on a twisty road, but give a little bit away in terms of comfort. And that's really what the Citroen C4 is about, because I'm going to hit the speed hump at 50 k's an hour and it just goes over it no problem at all. Sure, the rear suspension might be a little bit rudimentary in its torsion beam setup, but a torsion beam isn't inherently bad, and this car's is pretty good, save for a little bit of the boom that does make it into the cabin, especially when we have this optional sunroof open. It seems to make it slightly worse. But again, it's actually really good on the whole, and you never feel like the wheels are overly connected and going to throw the car off the road, because there's such a plush suspension under there to start with. And the great thing is, when you take this softly suspended car out of the urban environment, it doesn't feel like it falls flat on its face. Instead, it feels like Citroen has really tuned the high-speed rebound to be quite a lot firmer, and it keeps the car in control, and you can really exploit its surprisingly dynamic and soft and very faithful chassis. It's great fun. You've also got this really light steering, which works well in urban environments, but when you get out onto the open road, it weights up as well, which is great. Now, what isn't so great, unfortunately, for the C4 is that it's been rated as a 4-star ANCAP vehicle in Australia, and also 4 stars in the Euro NCAP testing in Europe. Now, that might be enough to put you off buying this car, but if you just look at the number alone, that 4-star rating, indeed, it does seem pretty dire. However, when you start looking deeper into this car's competitors and where this car lost out, then things don't seem quite as bad, perhaps. Obviously, personal safety is not something that I'm going to be able to tell you whether it's a consideration for you or not. That's going to be up to you. But I wouldn't overlook the C4 just based on its 4-star rating, because it does still have stuff like adaptive cruise control, AEB with pedestrian and cyclist detection, lane keep assist and blind spot monitoring, and a 360-degree camera, which is honestly pretty useless, but it is there. Now, it failed on the ANCAP procedure due to its poor adult occupant crash protection. However, its child occupant crash protection was pretty decent. So it's definitely something you've got to dig into and understand if the C4 is going to be the right choice for you, because honestly, the way it drives is absolutely sublime. I really enjoy driving the Citroen C4, and if it's on your list, I would definitely see if you can take it out for a test drive, because it is just such fun and a real return to form for the French manufacturer. So what do we think of the Citroen C4? Well, there is a special place in my heart for French cars that drive like this, with a punchy little engine, that turbocharged 3-cylinder, and extremely comfortable suspension tune. I really do dig driving this car. There are a couple of shortcomings, of course. The price is pretty high, even though it does get a huge level of standard equipment, and that 4-star ANCAP rating might have some people questioning their decision to buy this car, but you can let me know in the comment section down below whether that's something you take into account when purchasing your next car. And while you're down there, we'd also love it if you could hit that subscribe button. And as always, thank you for watching Chasing Cars.